The silence in the forest that late afternoon was not peaceful. It was the kind of silence that comes before a change. The orange sky, filtered through the dense canopy above, cast a dim light on the damp leaves, and not a single bird dared to sing. Among the vines hanging like ropes abandoned by the gods and twisted branches that looked like skeletal hands pointing to the earth, a new life crawled forward. A puppy. Small, filthy, trembling and with eyes full of despair, the little dog could barely steady its paws, stumbling as if every step was a battle against the abandonment that had brought him there. He didn't bark. He didn't have the strength for it. What escaped his throat was a hoarse sound, something between a whimper and a plea, a choked cry that reached no one. There were no humans nearby, no other dogs, only the forest, ancient and indifferent. But that day, indifference would yield. Above 10 meters off the ground, nestled among the interwoven branches of an ancient fig tree, a pair of eyes watched everything with quiet intensity. It was Jambo, a capuchin monkey with dark fur and a scar above his left eyebrow, a mark from a time he preferred not to remember. Intelligent, solitary, and avoided by the others of his kind, Jambo had learned to live in the shadows of the green, observing the world with unusual stillness. He had seen humans from a distance, watched other forest creatures fight for food, territory, and survival, and now he saw this, a helpless pup, clearly left behind by someone who lacked the courage to kill him, but also lacked the courage to love him. Jambo tilted his head, intrigued. This was no prey, no threat. It was a cry in the shape of an animal. The monkey's instinct was to retreat, to disappear into the leaves and forget what he saw. But something in that scene struck him. There was something in the puppy's eyes that pulled him toward a chasm he thought he had already climbed out of, a chasm of loss. Months earlier, Jambo had lost his own baby, a small monkey he used to carry on his back every day until, during a human research incursion, traps were left behind. His son fell into one of them and never returned. Since that day, Jambo hadn't come down from his grief, only climbed higher into the trees. But now, seeing that fragile animal trying to climb a rock and slipping, letting out a soft cry of pain, Jambo felt a sting in his chest, as if something had been torn out again, or perhaps as if something was falling back into place. Without a sound, as only the seasoned know how to do, Jambo descended along the side of the tree with restrained agility. His eyes didn't blink. His fingers gripped the branches firmly, but his heart hesitated. When his bare feet touched the moist ground, the sound of the jungle seemed to swallow the moment. Tico, a name Jambo didn't yet know but would one day love, turned around. He saw the creature approaching. His eyes widened. For a moment, fear overpowered exhaustion, and he tried to back away. But Jambo didn't move forward. He sat, calmly, as if to say, "I'm no threat." The silence between them lasted what felt like an eternity. Then the puppy took a step, then another, and then he lay down, exhausted, surrendered. Jambo approached and with the tip of his fingers touched the dog's head with a tenderness he hadn't used in years. It wasn't the touch of a wild animal, it was the touch of a father. Night fell like a heavy curtain over the clearing, and the two beings, so different, so broken, so lonely, slept together for the first time. One laying on top of the other, warmed not just by their body heat, but by something humans often struggle to understand, and animals know by heart, the deep need to care and be cared for. That night, without knowing it, Jambo adopted Tico, and Tico received the first real home of his life. The forest didn't know it yet, but it was about to witness one of the most improbable and most moving stories ever told. Dawn arrived filtered through the tree trunks, as if the light were afraid to break what the night had so carefully woven. The forest, awakening in its usual symphony of chirps, crickets, and rustling leaves, had no idea that something extraordinary had taken place there. Yet nestled between vines and roots, in a patch of earth surrounded by ferns, two creatures slept together like mother and child. Capuchin monkey Jambo, eyes half open, awoke first. His nostrils moved slowly, sniffing the air. His body, always tense and alert, now felt calm. It was a strange sensation for someone used to leaping, dodging, and staying constantly on guard. When he looked down, he saw little Tico curled up, nestled within his furry arms, breathing softly, his paws trembling in dreams that perhaps included milk, warmth, or a lap he had never known. That silent moment, that fragile image in his hands, it awakened something in Jambo that wild instinct couldn't explain, and didn't need to. Tico opened his eyes slowly, as if still unsure he was alive, but he didn't flee. The shock of first contact had passed. Fear had been dissolved by a gesture of comfort that his instinct, even so young, recognized as safe. The puppy lifted his head with effort and licked the monkey's arm, a gesture of affection, of surrender. Jambo didn't pull away. He stared into the puppy's brown eyes for long seconds, eyes that said, "Don't hurt me," and at the same time, "Don't leave me." This wasn't just a physical meeting, it was an emotional recognition. Two beings abandoned by life, brought together by either cosmic whim or wild miracle. Jambo stood up slowly, and with a gesture no female of his species had ever taught him, picked up Tico in both arms, supporting the soft, filthy little body as if it were his own child. He climbed into the trees with him, not in a rush, but with intention. The forest, vast and indifferent as always, now felt smaller, more intimate. What had once been the shelter of a loner had become the territory of a home. When they reached a high branch with a clear view of the ground, Jambo sat and placed Tico beside him. He looked around. No immediate threats, but his mind had already changed. This was no longer just about survival. Now, there was responsibility. He could no longer just flee, hide, eat and sleep. Now something needed him, depended on him. And for some reason only those who've loved can understand. He wanted it to. As Jambo searched for edible fruits and leaves, an instinct that had always served only himself, he now shared everything with the puppy. He tried to get Tico to chew mashed fruit, even spit out the softest pulp in smaller bits. When the pup refused, either from strangeness or weakness, Jambo persisted. He touched his nose gently, encouraged him, licked his face to nudge him on. This was no longer just an animal saving another. It was grief being healed through giving, a void being filled by weak barks and eyes begging for more time together. That afternoon, a coral snake slithered toward the branch where Tico slept alone, curled up. Jambo, even from meters away, spotted the sinuous movement and launched through the trees like a living arrow. He leapt from branch to branch with fierce speed, and within seconds pounced on the serpent, biting, beating it with branches, screaming with that guttural sound only furious monkeys can make. The snake fled, and in that moment, for the first time, the forest sensed something new had emerged. A dog who was the son of a monkey, and a monkey who would be a father until the end. By nightfall, Tico was walking with more steadiness. His barks were still short, but they now carried tone. Jambo carried him on his back, only when the puppy showed signs of fatigue. Their bond was no longer one-sided. It wasn't just rescue, it was reciprocity. Tico now gathered dry leaves for the nest. He licked the monkey's feet while he slept. He cared. He imitated. It was the beginning of a connection that, at first glance, seemed absurd, but in reality was truer than many between equals. And in that moment, under the moonlight filtered through the canopy, they slept once again lying on the same branch, close, united by something that needs no explanation. Because love, whether in the jungle or in the city, knows no shape, only bond. The jungle holds an ancient memory, but it does not mourn. The branches that protect today may be the stage of death tomorrow. The trails that lead to fresh fruit can just as easily conceal thorns. Yet among so many silent, savage cycles, there are stories that refuse to vanish, even when their protagonists are long gone. Jambo was one of those stories. He didn't speak, he didn't cry, he never told anyone. But in his soul, he carried a name that had never been spoken aloud: Nabu, the baby he lost. The one who clung tightly to his tail, who mimicked his movements with flawless precision, and who, one day, fell into a trap hidden beneath rotting leaves, left by hunters. Jambo fought. He screamed. He bit human hands until blood spilled, but he lost. Nabu's small body was taken, never seen again. From that day on, Jambo never looked into the eyes of another of his kind. He became a legend among the monkeys, the father who went mad. But he hadn't gone mad. He had simply made a decision to never love anything again. Until now. It felt strange to him, the weight of Tico's body sleeping on top of his. It was unsettling to realize that his first impulse upon waking was to check if the pup was still breathing. It was uncomfortable to love again, because love meant risking loss again. But love, when it's inevitable, seeps in through the cracks. And Jambo could no longer stop it. With every step, every shared fruit, every raspy bark escaping Tico's throat, Jambo's heart tightened. This wasn't animal charity. It was substitution. It was healing. And in some way, it was also guilt. As if by saving Tico, he was asking Nabu for forgiveness, as if he were saying, "This time I won't fail." The gestures began to change. Jambo didn't just care anymore, he taught. He showed Tico how to avoid dangerous anthills. He pointed to hollow trunks with stored rainwater. He chased off bats before Tico could get close, and in a gesture rare among wild monkeys, he used wide leaves to line the ground before laying the puppy down. That kind of care doesn't come from instinct, but from the pain of someone who's already lost. He didn't want to be a father. He already had been one, but the jungle had given him a second chance. And now, unlike the first, he was willing to fight anything, even fate itself. Meanwhile, Tico began to grow with astonishing speed. His eyes began to shine. His body, once trembling and thin, was gaining strength. He barked with a new tone. He leapt over small obstacles. And more than that, he looked at Jambo with awe. It wasn't just gratitude, it was emotional dependence, it was a bond. Tico no longer remembered where he came from. His memory was too short to recall the face of the one who abandoned him, but it was long enough to hold every one of Jambo's gestures, every leap, every touch. Every night he had been covered with leaves or gently licked when he cried, and while the pup grew, Jambo was being reborn. To the eyes of the forest, it was just a monkey caring for a dog, but to those who looked closely, it was a father seeking redemption, an orphan being saved, a reunion of two losses that had found one another. And even without words, without culture, without any rational explanation, what they were building was stronger than blood. But like all wild peace, it comes with a short lifespan, and the first threat would not come from nature. It would come from within, from the monkeys themselves. The group that once ignored Jambo had begun to feel uneasy. The pup's scent, the presence of a predator among them, Jambo's strange behaviors, all were seen as deviation, as danger. And since the jungle does not tolerate difference for long, retaliation was coming. One night, as they slept on a high branch, Tico was awakened by a strange sound, a dry snap, a whisper, a rustle in the leaves. And before he could bark, Jambo leapt upright. He felt the danger. He sensed the ambush. Because in the jungle, when you love, you must also be ready to defend. The jungle is not made of malice, but of balance. And anything that strays from the logic of predation, anything that offers fragility instead of strength, love instead of instinct, affection instead of dominance, is seen as a mistake. And in nature, mistakes are corrected. Jambo knew this. He felt it. And that night, upon hearing the cracking sounds, the whispers in the branches, the shiver running down Tico's back, he understood. They were surrounded, not by snakes, not by jaguars, but by those who had once been his. The troop of monkeys he had distanced himself from after losing Nabu was now there, eyes glowing in the dark, teeth bared, making short rhythmic sounds that said more than 1,000 words. You are no longer one of us. The reason? The pup, a dog, a predator among primates, an intruder who, without understanding, had become a symbol of weakness to the others. They didn't understand the bond. They didn't accept the presence. To them, Jambo had surrendered to human behavior, caring, protecting, teaching. But monkeys don't do that with predators. Monkeys protect themselves, attack, dominate, and Jambo had broken every code. It was time for punishment. The first attack was symbolic, a branch thrown from afar, a warning. Then came the approach. 3 larger monkeys, one of them Jambo's old rival named Goro, muscular and cruel-eyed, positioned themselves on parallel branches. It was a siege, a trial, and in the center, between 2 worlds, stood Jambo. With Tico clinging to his back, still trying to understand what was happening, he let out a loud, hoarse, deep cry. Not a threat, but a warning. Don't come closer. But they came. The first leap came from Goro, straight at the trunk where Jambo stood. They clashed. Tico fell, rolled to the ground yelping. Two other monkeys tried to grab him, and that's when hell broke loose. Jambo let out a roar that tore through the night and launched himself at the attackers. He was no longer a monkey. He was a father at war. He struck, bit, scratched, used stones, branches, anything he could find. He shielded Tico with his own body, and even injured, bleeding, he faced the entire troop alone. The fight lasted minutes, but it felt like an eternity. In the end, Jambo stood, panting, trembling, but standing. Goro backed away, one eye injured, and the others dispersed. Not out of fear, but out of respect. A respect forged through insane courage and silence. From that night forward, Jambo was officially out of the troop, expelled, exiled, alone, but not completely. Tico, though injured in the paw, crawled to him and licked his face. A small gesture, but one that sealed a new chapter. They were no longer just father and son. They were a pair against the world, outcasts from nature itself, exiled from the jungle for loving too much, and even if it cost them food, safety, and shelter, Jambo accepted it, because he had lost once, and he wouldn't lose again. In the days that followed, the forest changed. The heat grew harsher, fruits became scarce, water sources dried up. Jambo and Tico now lived in shadows, far from known paths. They slept in hollows, hid from birds of prey, avoided even the cries of distant monkeys. Their world had shrunk, and it grew more hostile by the day. The jungle, like a body rejecting a virus, was pushing them out with increasing force, and even so, in the midst of every risk and deprivation, something grew between them, the certainty that one had chosen the other. Jambo now taught Tico to sniff out fallen fruit, to dodge soldier ants, to drink water from spiral-shaped leaves, and Tico, in turn, followed him like a shadow. He never slept alone again, never barked without first looking to his father. It was as if both knew they only had each other, and that if the jungle didn't accept them, they would have to become the jungle themselves. But what neither of them knew was that the worst trial was yet to come, because not every threat growls. Some wear shoes and come from the city. Exile has no words. It settles slowly, like night spreading over the leaves without anyone noticing. In the days following their expulsion, Jambo and Tico discovered what it truly meant to be alone. The dense forest, which had once offered hiding spots and food, even in its most stingy corners, had become hostile ground. Everything once familiar, paths, low branches, water springs, even fruit trees, had to be avoided. The territory of exclusion grew day by day. The scent of the troop marked the jungle, and a single misstep could lead them to be tracked and attacked again. Tico felt it first. The young pup, once more active, began walking with slow, painful steps. His small paws were torn by thorns. His ribs began to show again. The droplets of dew on the leaves at dawn were no longer enough. His once bright eyes now searched Jambo's face for an answer, but the monkey had none. Because hunger isn't just the absence of food. It's the body's scream that wounds the soul of the one who loves more than the stomach of the one who suffers. Jambo searched everywhere. He climbed trees looking for nests, knocked bark in search of larvae, dug in moist earth, but found nothing. The ants had migrated, the fruits were still green, the insects were scarce, and the water seemed to have been forgotten by God in that corner of the world. He even chewed leaves and offered them to Tico, though they held no nutrition. But the pup could barely chew. His body panted. The afternoon heat made him faint for minutes at a time. It was the antechamber of death. And Jambo knew it with the instinct of someone who had seen life slip through their fingers before. But this time, unlike before, he would not accept it. This time, he would fight to the end. On the third day, without food, the forest seemed to mock them. A storm formed on the horizon, then veered away before reaching them. The scent of rain lingered in the air, but it never fell. The leaves danced in the wind. The sky screamed with thunder, but nothing more than passing humidity touched the ground. In desperation, Jambo climbed the tallest tree in the area. From there, he spotted a clearing in the distance, where perhaps, just perhaps, an old stream still flowed. He didn't know if it still existed, but he had no choice. The journey there was a march of pain. Tico had to be carried. Jambo stumbled. Every jump was shorter, every landing slower. Time distorted. The birds were no longer music. They were mockery. The insects stung like daggers, and the earth itself seemed to lean against them. Until in the late afternoon, with the sun burning their skin and vision blurred, Jambo heard it. A faint sound, a whisper from the earth. Water. With his last strength, he ran, leapt, fell from the tree in an uncontrolled drop, injured his arm, but didn't stop. Tico, unconscious, hung limp on his shoulder. When they reached the stream's edge, Jambo plunged his face into the water like a dying animal reborn. Then he scooped it with his hands, lifted Tico, and bathed him, gently, as if each drop were a silent apology. The pup responded, moved a paw, blinked, tried to lick, and for a moment, Jambo cried. Not with tears, monkeys rarely cry, but with his whole body. He cried with trembling arms, with a heaving chest, with the silence of a father who had almost lost his child twice in the same life. They slept there, wet, covered in leaves, under a finally starry sky. The night brought no food, but it brought breath. It brought time, and sometimes in the jungle that's all one can hope for. When morning came, Tico stood, still weak, but standing, and Jambo, seeing him walk in small circles, sniffing the ground as if trying to understand where they were, knew they had won another battle. The forest didn't want them, but death, at least for now, wouldn't take them either. That morning, when the filtered sun returned to the earth and the breeze carried the scent of ripe fruit in the distance, the two walked together, slowly, but together. And in that rhythm of survival and silence, something within them solidified. Because some bonds are born from affection, but the strongest are born from pain. The clearing where Jambo and Tico awoke after 3 days of near death seemed ordinary in the eyes of the forest, but to the two of them, it was sacred. There, death had been defeated with the bitter taste of mud and the warmth of one chest pressed against another. And it was also there, beneath twisted branches and exposed roots, that something new was born. A shift. Tico was no longer a burden, not just a puppy. He now watched Jambo with different eyes, as if he understood in a primal way that the monkey was not just a shelter, he was a mirror, a reflection of the fight Tico too would need to learn to wage. The first sign came at dusk. Jambo, still tired, was climbing short trees searching for overripe fruit soft enough for them both to eat. Meanwhile, Tico explored the ground near the water, still limping, but curious. He sniffed everything, smelled the leaves, dug with his paws, until by instinct he let out a sound. A short bark, dry, nearly voiceless, but it echoed through the clearing like thunder. Jambo froze, turned, looked at the pup. Tico looked back and barked again, louder this time, as if to say, "I'm here," as if the forest, which had long silenced his pain, now had to listen. That night they ate better. Red fruits, roots torn by force, a bird's egg found by chance. Hunger backed off, and with it, energy returned. But the real test would not take long, because the jungle doesn't allow relief for long. And when they least expected it, the threat came crawling along the ground. An hungry raccoon, larger than normal, sniffing out scraps, was approaching. Its eyes gleamed in the shadows. Its steps were firm, and its target was Tico. The pup, distracted, was slow to notice, but Jambo saw. He shouted, raced down, ready to fight. But before he could act, Tico did the unthinkable. He arched his body, growled, and barked, not a weak bark, not broken. A solid sound that came from the throat like a miniature thunderclap. A sound that didn't say, "I'm afraid," but rather, "I exist." The raccoon paused, hesitated. Tico stepped forward, barked again. Jambo, surprised, froze mid-jump, and watched. The predator slowly backed away into the shadows, not out of physical fear, but because it recognized something the jungle respects: courage. Jambo approached slowly. He didn't cheer. Monkeys don't celebrate like humans, but his gaze had changed. He reached the pup, lowered his head, pressed his forehead against Tico's. An ancestral gesture, a gesture of equals. For the first time, Tico was not just a fragile being rescued. He was a companion, a learner who had crossed the first threshold. Instinct was now being replaced by something greater, the formation of identity. The next morning, everything was different. Tico no longer waited to be fed. He searched, chased insects, flipped leaves, bit hollow bark. Jambo watched carefully, corrected movements, taught with gestures. The language between them had no words, but it was as clear as sunlight. They were now a unit, a microcosm, a walking home made of roots, stones, and branches. And that's exactly why when the sound of human voices approached, laughter, children's screams, footsteps over dry leaves, Jambo froze. He knew what it meant. Humans, children, people from the nearby village. The border between the wild world and the civilized one was growing thinner, and he would have to choose, retreat and vanish once more, or come closer, even knowing that where there are humans, there are traps. But before deciding, he looked at Tico. The pup, now steady on his feet, walked beside him with his chest held high. And in that moment, Jambo understood. He was no longer alone. And the pup was no longer just a dog. He was part of him, part of an improbable love that had survived the jungle, the hunger, the thirst, and now maybe was strong enough to face the world of men. The line between forest and civilization isn't made of walls. It's made of sounds, of smells, of subtle shifts that instincts notice long before eyes do. And on that clear sky, light breeze morning, Jambo knew. He knew it by the scent of soap, of wood-burning stoves, of flowers nurtured by human hands. He also knew it by the sounds, children's laughter, short footsteps running over hard-packed dirt, the distant barking of domesticated dogs. They were near the village, too near, and even though every fiber of his being begged to flee, his heart stayed. Tico walked beside him as if it were just another trail, but there was something new in the air, a different scent, a curious warmth, and soon they reached the edge of the forest. Between bushes and stones, Jambo saw it, an open clearing used by local children as a play area, a makeshift soccer field with branch goals and empty plastic bottles marking the lines. 3 boys were playing, and a girl, small, wearing a red hat, wide-eyed, sat in the shade holding a doll. Her name was Leah, daughter of a biologist who studied the region's fauna and who always told her, "Animals don't speak, but they tell stories." Jambo approached cautiously. Tico, curious, ran slightly ahead, and then the unthinkable happened. They were seen. One of the boys stopped running, pointed. The others froze. The ball stopped, and silence fell. What they saw looked like it had walked out of a storybook, a serious-eyed monkey, walking with a bipre, puppy at his feet, like father and son, like a mythical duo lost in time. The children began to laugh, not mockery, but wonder, enchantment. Leah stood up, pulled an old phone from her pocket, recorded. The lens shook, her hands sweated, but she knew this wasn't normal, this was special. And within seconds, the video was done, shared with her mum, her dad, the neighbors' group chat. And without Jambo or Tico knowing in that very moment, their story began to leak from the trees and enter the world. But wonder has a cost, because for every child who sees magic, there's an adult who sees opportunity. And on the other side of the clearing, Subaldo, a retired hunter turned educational showman, was watching everything through a grimy pair of binoculars. His eyes didn't see love, didn't see a story. They saw dollar signs. A trained monkey was a rarity. A monkey walking with a dog, a spectacle. And where there's spectacle, there's exploitation. That same afternoon, Baldo set out, walked trails, scattered scraps of meat, set 2 cages, one big enough for a monkey, the other small for a dog, and waited. Jambo, who already knew the smell of traps, sensed it from afar, but Tico was still innocent. The next morning, lured by the scent of raw meat, he approached curiously and would have been caught if Jambo hadn't arrived just in time. He leapt from a high tree, screamed, grabbed the pup by the neck with his teeth and shattered the trap with sharp stones. But the message had been sent. The human world was no children's playground. It was a minefield. And now, more than ever, Jambo knew he couldn't just teach Tico to flee snakes or raccoons. He would have to teach him how to survive the deadliest predator of all, mankind. That day, the two retreated, returned to a deeper trail, but it was too late. Leah's video was already circulating, already on the phones of adults, biologists, merchants, and the curious, already sparking comments like, "Someone needs to capture this. This is worth money. This is nature's miracle." And at the center of it all, Two beings who had asked for nothing but to live together. Two hearts bound by something no one watching them could begin to understand. But the jungle had already taught Jambo that the gaze of the observer can be just as dangerous as the claws of the attacker, and he could feel it. More traps would come, more footsteps, more hunters. The forest, once his only enemy, was now joining forces with concrete vanity and profit, and their time was running out. Man has no claws like the jaguar, no venom like the coral snake, no wings like the harpy eagle. But he's the only predator who can surround without running, hunt without touching, and destroy with a plan. When Leah's video reached the wrong hands, the story of Jambo and Tico stopped being a miracle and became a target. It was the perfect image. The monkey with the stance of a father, and the puppy trailing behind him like a son. An anomaly that stirred hearts, made headlines, and most of all, attracted money. And for men like Conso Baldo, this wasn't poetry, it was profit. On the third day after the video was filmed, the old hunter returned to the clearing, but this time not alone. He brought an assistant, a skinny young man named Breno, who sold videos to nature curiosity websites. They also brought equipment, nets, tranquilizers, bait, and 4 large cages. The plan was simple: capture Jambo alive and sell him to the capital's zoo. Tico would be a bonus, a cute extra to complete the package. Baldo knew the forest, but what he didn't know was the bond, the intensity of a love that crossed species, and that, precisely because it was improbable, was stronger than any tie a man could comprehend. That afternoon they set the traps with precision. Chunks of fresh meat laid along a path recently cleared, a trail Jambo and Tico had passed 2 days before. The scent of meat filled the air, and the hook wasn't just physical, it was emotional. Tico, still young, still driven by instinct, was vulnerable to the pull of smell. At dawn, Tico woke up first. He sniffed the wind, recognized the scent, grew restless. Jambo, still lying down, opened his eyes slowly and immediately understood. This wasn't just a smell, it was a trap. He had sensed something similar years ago, too clean, too strong, too easy. He tried to hold the pup with his arms, but Tico, impatient, let out a soft bark and darted into the forest. And in that instant, everything accelerated. Jambo launched after him, but Tico was fast. When he reached the clearing, the pup was already just steps from the bait. The cage was camouflaged under leaves and mud. The trigger wire was nearly invisible. Jambo leapt from a tree with a sharp, desperate cry, but too late. The pup stepped on the mechanism. The metal door slammed shut with a dry snap, cutting off the bark that followed. The forest went silent. The clang echoed all the way to the village. Baldo, waiting at a safe distance, grinned. "Got him!" Breno rushed to roll the camera. But as they approached the cage, something stunned them. The pup wasn't alone. Jambo was on top of the cage, screaming, beating on the iron, throwing stones, using sticks to try and force the lock open. And when he saw the 2 men getting closer, he did something neither expected. He attacked. It was a savage strike, but not mindless. Jambo pounced on Breno's shoulder, tore off his cap, scratched his face, ripped his backpack. Baldo tried to fend him off with a branch, but the monkey was fast. He dodged, returned, created chaos. For long minutes, the clearing turned into a war zone, and in the middle of it, Tico, trapped, whimpered. Each bark was a knife in Jambo's chest. He had to open the cage, but didn't know how. Then he withdrew, vanished into the trees. Baldo and Breno sighed in relief. But what they didn't know was that Jambo never flees. He retreats to strike right. Minutes later, as the 2 men approached the cage to lift it, he returned, silent, with a stone in hand. He jumped from a branch and hit the lock with precision. The latch gave. The door opened. Tico ran. Jambo grabbed him by the back, and together they vanished into the forest as if they had never been there. The 2 men stood stunned. Breno was bleeding. Baldo cursed. The camera was destroyed. And the story that was meant to be a spectacle slipped through their fingers. But for Jambo, this wasn't an escape. It was a warning. The human world wasn't just noise. It was poison. It was cages. It was separation. And now, more than ever, he understood. The love between him and Tico wasn't just protection, it was defiance. A rebellion against everything that tried to say, "This isn't possible." That night, far from the clearing, hidden beneath the thick roots of a massive fig tree, Tico slept like never before, pressed to Jambo's chest, and the monkey, breath weary but steady, ran his fingers across the pup's back as if counting him, as one who gives thanks for one more day together, as one who swears, "No one will tear us apart." The sky that night seemed to have swallowed the stars. Thick clouds blanketed the treetops like a veil of omen. The air was heavier. The forest, which usually moved with the whispers of insects, branches, and nocturnal birds, seemed to be holding its breath. Something was wrong. Jambo felt it. Since early afternoon, his body had been sending signals. Chills down his spine, eyes more alert, ears always turned backward. And Tico was different too. Restless, sniffing the wind as if sensing a scent he didn't recognize, and yet was drawn to. It was the scent of fresh bait, of meat, of a trap. But what even Jambo didn't know was that Baldo, furious from having been defeated and humiliated, had returned to the forest, alone. No Braino, no cameras. He no longer wanted fame. He wanted revenge. He had set a new trap, more sophisticated. A silent trap, camouflaged under mud and triggered by weight. At its center, a piece of rotting meat soaked in fish oil. The scent was irresistible. The location, strategic. The very stream where Jambo and Tico used to hide. A place of memory, a place of trust, which made it lethal. In the early hours of the night, as Jambo slept curled in dry leaves beneath a fig tree root, Tico got up. The scent arrived on the wind. Strong, intrusive, primal. The pup sniffed, circled, let out a soft bark. Jambo opened his eyes by instinct but saw no danger. Just Tico, curious, walking a few meters away. He closed his eyes again, and in that brief lapse of trust, everything happened. The snap of the trap wasn't loud, but it was final. The sound of compressed wood, metal slamming shut, and sudden silence. When Jambo opened his eyes again, the pup was no longer there. The emptiness beside him screamed louder than any howl. He leapt up, sniffed, followed the scent of meat, and then he saw a glint between the leaves, a metal structure half buried in the soil, and inside, Tico, trapped, silent, eyes wide, tail motionless. Time froze. Jambo tried to rush to him, but another sound interrupted. Footsteps. Baldo, approaching, slow, confident, armed. The old hunter wasn't smiling. He spat words through his teeth. "This time you're not getting away, you bastard." The flashlight lit the ground. The weapon swung from his hand. Jambo climbed a branch and held his breath, watched everything. His heart beat like a war drum. Tico, inside the cage, cried without sound. A tear slid down his face, as if saying, "Save me." But Jambo knew attacking now would be suicide. Baldo was alert, armed. The risk was losing everything. He had to wait. He had to think. And that wait hurt more than any bite. When he saw the hunter reach for the cage, raising his hand to grab it, Jambo exhaled slowly, then vanished into the darkness. Not from cowardice, but because a true father doesn't strike in impulse. He strikes at the right time. In the hours that followed, Baldo carried the cage to his makeshift cabin at the forest's edge. There, he locked Tico in a shed, fed him scraps, and chained the structure with iron links. To him, the game was over. He just had to wait for the buyer's call and the profit would be sealed. But Jambo watched everything from the treetops, eyes burning red, body still, heart burning like a buried coal. That night, as Baldo slept, the monkey descended in silence. He stole tools from the cart, picked up stones, tested doors, mapped the path. The plan was born right there, between forest whispers and the distant sobs of a pup behind wooden planks. The jungle had forged in Jambo not just a father, but a strategist, and he would do whatever it took. He would break the unbreakable, scream, bite, shatter, but he would bring his son back. Because the love born from the improbable is also the love that defies cages, men, laws, and distance. And for someone who's been a father twice, losing a third time was not an option. The dawn was thick like smoke. Not a single star dared pierce the sky. Silence reigned, broken only by the occasional creak of the wooden shed where Tico was imprisoned. There, between old planks and the stench of oil, the pup curled up in a corner, eyes lost, ears drooping. The chain wrapped around the cage buzzed with the faint tremor of his futile attempts to escape. Every sound he made was a call, a whisper for help that only one heart in the world could hear. And that heart was on the outside, waiting. Jambo watched everything from the canopy of a nearby tree. His eyes glowed under the faint veiled moonlight. The plan he had crafted during the previous night was ready. He knew the cracks, the weak spots in the walls, the holes. He knew the exact moment Baldo snored the loudest, the minutes when the lamplight flickered and dimmed. He knew the sound of the door's hinge and how long it took a man to wake up to it. Jambo was no longer just a monkey. He was a tactician forged by pain. At 3:42 a.m. he moved, slid down the tree like a shadow, crossed the barbed wire fence through a spot where vegetation had weakened the line, dragged a dry branch with his tail, pushing it precisely toward the back of the shed, where a tiny window sat, just a ventilation opening no human would imagine a primate using. But Jambo was no ordinary primate. He scaled the sidewall, using bolts, cracks, and dangling wires as footholds. With his teeth, he removed a loose roof tile. With his fingers, he unlocked the slatted vent. He slipped inside like a ghost, and there he was in the enemy's den, where no wild animal should ever be. But he didn't hesitate, because on the other side of the shed, behind metal bars, was his entire world. Tico. The pup saw him. He gasped, tried to bark, but only a hoarse sound came out. Even trapped, he wagged his tail, and in that wag, Jambo knew there was still time. He climbed down from the beams lightly, approached the cage. The chain was thick, but the padlock was rusted. And there, among tools stolen from the cart days earlier, was the answer, a pointed rock and a screwdriver. The monkey lifted the tool with both hands, hit the lock, once, twice. With every strike, Tico flinched. On the other side of the wall, Baldo stirred in his hammock, half asleep. Third hit, the lock bent. Fourth, the chain gave way. Jambo dropped everything, grabbed the cage gate, and tore it open. Tico jumped into his arms, cried, licked his face with desperate joy as if begging never to be left behind again. But the reunion was shattered by a shout. Baldo had woken. The sound of the chain had broken his sleep. The main door slammed open. There he was, man, flashlight, knife in hand. The beam blinded them for a second, just a second. Jambo reacted, grabbed Tico by the scruff and ran to the side, climbed the shelves like lightning. Baldo followed, shouted, "Get back here, you bastard," stumbled over tools. Tico trembled, but Jambo leapt across beams as if the ground were lava. The only way out was the roof. Jambo aimed at the loose tile, jumped with the pup on his back, smashed through the exit with his body, escaped. Baldo tried to follow but slipped, fell, screamed. The sound of his crash echoed through the shed like a victory. Outside, Jambo bolted through the jungle, Tico secure, their breaths synced in a single rhythm. Steps in cadence, eyes sharp. The sky began to lighten, and the day was born witnessing the most incredible escape the forest has ever seen. When they stopped, they were far, very far, on top of a high rock with a view of the entire valley. There, Tico lay on Jambo's chest, who panted, exhausted but alive, victorious. And for a moment, they both gazed at the horizon, and even without speaking, they said the same thing. No one will ever cage us. Escape doesn't end when the feet stop moving. It only ends when the memory goes quiet. But Jambo still carried the image of the cage slamming shut, the choked bark, the metallic scent. So he didn't stop. He climbed. More than ever, he climbed like he was fleeing from the world itself. With every leap over wet branches, every fingertip clawed into uneven stone, he pushed farther away from the village, from the familiar forest, from the rivers that once fed them. And as the two rose in altitude, the world around them began to change. The green began to fade. Tree canopies gave way to twisted shrubs, crawling moss and cutting winds. Tico, though stronger now, struggled to keep pace. The air was thinner, the trail unforgiving, but the pup didn't retreat. Every step beside Jambo was a pact. No matter where, I go with you. The mountain summit was neutral ground. No hunters dared come that high. No animals claimed that rocky soil. It was a territory without owner, where only those who belong nowhere can survive. That's where they stayed, And there on the rocky slopes where fog kisses stone and silence reigns, Jambo and Tico built what remained of a home. No broad leaves, no abundant fruits, but there was glacial water, edible lichen, and dry caves, enough for those who'd once lived on nothing. The days that followed were for rebuilding. Jambo lined the caves with dry twigs brought from lower grounds. Tico hunted small bugs, learning to sniff with precision. When the cold pressed harder, they slept pressed together, the pup covering Jambo's chest like a living blanket. It wasn't comfortable, but it was Gao, alive. And for those who've seen the edge of death, that's more than enough. It was in this exile at altitude that their bond reached its deepest point. Jambo no longer treated Tico like a pup, but like an higher equal. They made decisions together, shared silences, faced the weather like warriors forged in pain. And the solitude that once weighed on them now became refuge, because they were together, and together there was no more fear. But the summit has a cost. Time moves differently there. Nights are longer, mornings sharper, the body tires quicker, and the world feels impossibly far away. One afternoon, as the wind howled harder than usual, Tico descended to a lower ridge to sniff out food. When he returned, he found Jambo lying down, breathing, but still, eyes fixed on the sky, chest heaving with effort. It was the first time Tico felt true panic. He tried nudging Jambo's body, tried licking his face, dragged leaves, searched for water, barked, whined, but Jambo didn't respond like before. He was alive, but fading. Time, cold, old wounds, everything was demanding its price, and in that altitude where no one sees, nature claims what it owns. So Tico did the only thing he knew. He lay on top of him. Shivering, he pressed his body over his father's chest, sharing his warmth. He stayed there all night. No food, no sleep, just heat, just hope, perhaps praying in his own canine way. And at dawn, when the first rays of sunlight broke through the mountain mist, Jambo blinked, slowly, gently, but he blinked. And Tico barked, a short, cracked bark, but filled with relief. Life insisted. The bond endured. And there, in the mountains where no one wanted to be, lived two beings who had lost everything, except each other. And that, for those who have nothing, is everything. Winter doesn't arrive all at once. It announces itself slowly, in the way the wind shifts in tone, how the fog lingers longer, how ice droplets begin to replace gentle rain. And in the mountains where Jambo and Tico had sought refuge, winter wasn't just a season. It was a test. The jungle might be wild, but at least it was alive. The mountains were not. They didn't forgive exhaustion. They didn't welcome weakness. And it was in that silence of stone and ice that Jambo began to falter. At first it was subtle, slower movements, duller eyes, trouble climbing rocks that once posed no challenge. Then came the tremors. At night, while Tico slept curled beside him, Jambo's body shook involuntarily, as if the cold had grown roots deep within him. His muscles no longer obeyed, his fingers failed to snap branches, and his eyes no longer reflected the world, but reflected weariness. Tico sensed it before he understood. He stayed closer, barked less, sniffed and searched on his own. He began bringing twigs, nudging fruits with his nose, collecting water from shallow puddles. In his own way, he began to care, and every act was a replica of what he had learned from Jambo. Because love teaches. And everything the pup knew about living, surviving, resisting had been etched into him through the touch, the gaze, the silence of the one who now, for the first time, seemed unable to protect him. One especially cold night arrived without warning. The southern wind came like a blade, slicing through everything. They sealed the cave's entrance with leaves, stones, bits of dry wood, but the cold still crept in. And in that absolute darkness, Jambo's body trembled differently, slower, longer. Tico tried to warm him. He lay on top, pressed his chest to his father's, but Jambo didn't move. His breathing was faint, his chest barely rose, and for the first time, Tico smelled the end. He barked, cried, gently bit his father's fingers, trying to wake him. He dashed out of the cave across the thin snow and returned carrying whatever he could. A stick, a leaf, a bird bone, a piece of dried skin. None of it was enough. Nothing warmed him. So he lay down again. licked his face, begged without words for life to stay a little longer, and time, through some invisible mercy, listened. At dawn, Jambo opened his eyes. It took a moment, but when he saw the pup curled against him, sleeping in a fetal pose, wrapped in his own body, something inside him reignited. With effort, he stretched an arm, touched Tico's head, a brief touch, but a touch, and in that gesture, simple, weak, almost invisible, there was an entire sentence. Not yet. But Jambo knew. With the ancient wisdom of one who's seen the end before, he understood that their time in the mountains was ending. The cold would win, his body would give out, and if he wanted to save his son one last time, he would have to do the unthinkable: trust humans. In the hours that followed, Jambo began to descend, not quickly, not steadily, but with resolve. Tico, afraid, followed behind. They weren't going back because they wanted to. They were going back because they no longer could stay. The world above was impossible, and the world below was dangerous. But there was a chance, a thread of memory, a face Jambo still held in his mind. The girl in the red hat, Leah, the one who once saw them without fear, the one who filmed but didn't hunt, the one who, maybe, was their last hope. They were descending to find her, and Jambo knew either they reached her in time, or Tico would lose the only home he had ever known. The way back was silent, but every step carried memories. The forest that had once been home now felt distant, like a faded photograph. The trails they once moved through with ease now required effort. Jambo descended with a weakened body, but with eyes still burning with one certainty: he had to deliver Tico to someone who could continue from where he would stop. And that person had a name, a face, and a memory forever marked by a red hat. It was at dusk on the second day of their descent that fate made its move. Leah, now 8 years old, was walking along the trail beside her father, Dr. Sergio, a biologist from the forest reserve. He was taking his daughter to observe tracks and identify endangered species. She carried her beloved sketchbook and a simple camera hanging from her neck. As they rounded a bend, Leah stopped suddenly. Her eyes widened. The camera slipped from her chest, dangling from its strap, and her voice, caught between awe and tenderness, escaped in a whisper. "It's him." Ahead, standing on the dusty path, were Jambo and Tico, exhausted, dirty, but together. Tico wagged his tail slowly, as if recognizing the girl's scent. Jambo stood still, not backing away, but not advancing either. He was surrendering, with tired eyes, but without fear, as if saying, "It's your turn." Dr. Sergio stepped in front of his daughter and observed the scene with a clinical gaze. He recognized the monkey from the old footage. He recognized the pup, now grown. But what stood before him wasn't just two animals. It was a living story, one that as a biologist he could never explain through science alone. There was something stronger here, something human. Leah stepped forward slowly, held out her hand. Tico, still hesitant, walked toward her. He licked her fingers, nudged his nose against her belly like someone finding a safe harbor again. Then he looked back. Jambo remained still, his deep black eyes locked onto hers. There was no threat. There was surrender. He knew his body wouldn't last much longer, but he also knew he had found the right person. Dr. Sergio grabbed the radio, called the research base, requested veterinary assistance, asked for shelter, food, exams to be prepared. For the first time in his life, he did this not to catalogue, not for academia, but simply to save. And in that gesture, Jambo relaxed his shoulders, lay down on the ground, and slept. Tico curled up beside him, but no longer out of desperation. Now it was instinct, care, gratitude, and Leah, sitting next to them, began to draw. A monkey and a dog sleeping together, with leaves over them, as if the whole world could be reduced to this: two beings who found each other in abandonment and became home for one another. The next morning, Jambo woke in an enclosed space, but it was free, a natural shelter with logs, stones, and fresh grass. Tico ran from side to side, already lighter, already fed, already alive. And there, in that clearing shaped by human hands, what could have been a cage became a sanctuary. There were no chains, no electric fences. There was controlled freedom. There was care. There was permanence. Dr. Sergio chose to halt his formal research and dedicate the space to stories like this one. Leah became the symbol of the reserve. Her camera, now upgraded, became a tool to document impossible friendships. And Jambo spent his final months there, resting in the shade, watching Tico grow, seeing up close what he never had the chance to witness with Nabu. Life blooming. He passed on a quiet afternoon. No pain, no drama. He simply closed his eyes and didn't return. Tico howled for hours. Leah cried, holding him tight, and the world began to learn their story. Great stories don't die with their protagonists. They become seeds. And like trees growing through cracks in stone, they bloom in the most unlikely places. After Jambo's death, the world didn't return to normal, because nothing was ever normal again after the love between a monkey and a dog touched people's hearts. The sanctuary built by Dr. Sergio turned into a living space where the focus wasn't just on species, but on relationships. And at the center of this new world, walking from one corner to the other like a short-legged, sharp-eyed guardian, was him, Tico. He was no longer the fragile pup who once trembled in the forest cold. Now he ran through the corridors of the ecological base, barked with strength, jumped on visiting children and licked the hands of elderly guests who came to hear the story. Tico became a symbol of something modern humans had nearly forgotten, that love doesn't need logic, it just needs to happen. And even without words, he told that story every single day. At the heart of the sanctuary headquarters, there was a simple room. A rustic sofa, old cushions, walls covered with photographs. There Tico lay down almost every afternoon. On the carpet beside him rested a small wooden sculpture, a monkey lying down with a puppy on his chest. Hand-carved by Leah, the sculpture became a shrine of tenderness. Visitors from all over the world came to see it. They touched it, took pictures, cried, because in that cold, silent piece of wood lived something greater than matter, the living memory of a love that defied everything. Old videos of Jambo went viral. Leah's shaky footage from years ago now appeared in documentaries, children's books, and television specials. The monkey who raised a dog, the purest friendship in nature, the story the world needed. So many headlines, so many eyes, but Tico never knew any of that. He only knew he slept better when he smelled the couch where Jambo used to lie, and that sometimes, in his dreams, he still heard the rustling of branches above him, still felt the warmth of that chest, still searched among dry leaves for the trace of a presence that never faded. Leah, now a teenager, became Tico's official caregiver. She studied veterinary medicine, took him on hikes, called him my forest brother. She wrote books, gave lectures, but in every version one line never changed. Jambo wasn't a monkey, he was a father. That phrase became a motto. It was printed at the sanctuary's entrance, embroidered on volunteer t-shirts, painted on the walls of the local school, because the world, starved for beauty amid chaos, had found in that friendship what it had been seeking all along: meaning. And so, with time, what began as abandonment beneath the trees became a universal legacy, because Jambo's love, a love that knew no species, became a language even the most skeptical heart could understand. And Tico, now old, still wandered the halls slowly, but with eyes full of something that can't be taught: history. Years went by. Tico aged with dignity. His tail, once a whip of joy, now trembled softly. His eyes, which once sparkled beside Jambo in the darkness of the forest, were smaller now, but still carried light. His steps had grown shorter, his muzzle whiter, but one thing had never changed: the way he lay on the sanctuary rug, in the exact same spot where the monkey used to rest, as if the body felt longing before the mind could name it. Leah was an adult now, a trained veterinarian and biologist. She ran the sanctuary with steady hands and an open heart. In every animal she cared for, she saw the reflection of the bond that changed her life. But she knew the story of Tico and Jambo couldn't live only in videos, books, or memories. It needed a body. It needed form. It needed presence. She was the one who envisioned the monument, a bronze sculpture shaped from photos, memories, and tears, a monkey with a serene expression seated, arms forming a gentle cradle. In the center, a small puppy curled up, eyes closed. Both sculpted life-size, no exaggeration, no heroic pose, just an image that said everything. I chose to love you. The sculpture was placed in the town's central square, in front of the public school. Children took pictures, families left flowers. Tourists came from far away just to see it. But the most powerful part was what was written on the plaque at the statue's feet. A simple, direct message that gave goosebumps even to the most distracted passerby. Life finds love where it's least expected. Jambo and Tico forever. Tico was brought to the unveiling, blind in one eye, deaf on one side. But as soon as he smelled the square, the same square where he once played with Leah, where he walked with Jambo on their first outings, he barked. Faint, but he barked. And in that rough sound, there was something eternal. He sat in front of the statue, looked, or tried to, sniffed, and then laid down, exactly like the sculpture, as if, in his own way, he understood that this was him, that the bronze told his story, that this square would forever hold what time could never destroy. The next day, Tico fell asleep and did not wake up. Leah found him curled on the rug, his head resting on the wooden sculpture she had carved years before. He passed in peace, without pain, without fear, without longing, because he knew his love was already in the world, etched, eternal. Today, the square is officially named Jambo and Tico Square. Schools bear their names. The sanctuary has grown, and when children ask, "Why would a monkey care for a dog?" the adults smile, and answer with the one phrase that outlived everything, because love doesn't ask, it chooses. And so, among bronze leaves, carved eyes, and a square that never stood empty again, the forest and the city became one. The body of friendship, the body of courage, the body of two beings rejected by all except by each other. And for that reason, they were never alone again.